one of the things that we are on the precipice of losing is a real understanding and appreciation for an international community order, if you prefer the term, predicated on kind of a respect for legal boundaries and restraints that puts behind us the ambition and abuses of colonialism and imperialism. Those that are advocates of this kind of thing, speaking of like military adventurism, like to speak to the virtues of realism, that the strong do what they can, the weak do what they must, right? And you go back and you think about the origins of what makes conquest and subjugation of peoples and seizing of lands morally justified. It's a profound and troubling thing, right, to think that we might be going back to that kind of thinking. On a practical level, thinking of it as a historian, I think if the 20th century has taught us anything, one of those lessons is that kind of approach to power is ultimately self-defeating and causes suffering that I would hope that we would not want to be responsible for.
We're going to talk about Iran now.
Okay.
And I don't think there's any big secret that Iran is not exactly our country's friend. We can acknowledge that. We can acknowledge there are bad players out there. But just because there's bad players out there doesn't mean that you should run off and therefore, do something on the extreme side.
Yeah, I think one, I'm not sure there is a strategy beyond the mere simple ambition, right? I mean, if you look at like Venezuela, right, as a sort of early case study, micro example, what's actually happened? So you've deposed the leader, you've forced a change in government, and you've compelled certain concessions, kind of mercantilist almost concessions to the U.S., right? And that's it, right? There's no evidence of any sort of larger sort of policy vision. I mean, there's other things that need to be done, obviously, to execute on those things, but that's it, right? And so if Iran, in short order after that, from what we can tell, there isn't a whole lot more to it from a strategic policy perspective. The military operation's definitely much more expansive and robust. But beyond that, as a policy matter, I haven't been able to discern a larger sort of vision for what we're going to accomplish on the ground. Yeah. And I think that's an indictment of the country, of the president specifically, right? The executive policy that's being promulgated.
And I should add, it is not only the Democratic representatives. There's far more of the Democratic representatives, but there are a few Republican representatives that are saying the same thing.
Yeah, and hopefully it's becoming from a similar place in terms of real concern for the national interest for those that are serving. And I would hope for the sake of those that are being affected on the ground in all of the countries that are affected. One of the things that we've long embraced, maybe we've no longer embraced, is that wars are executed because they are justified in some way. And one of the sort of bare minimum justifications is that the peace that follows is presumed and likely to be better than the peace that preceded the war. It doesn't always work out that way, but at a bare minimum, you have a responsibility to have that expectation as a reasonable expectation. And from what we can tell, that's not the case in Iran. And so what it has instead done is open the door to a whole Pandora's box of negative outcomes that affect not only the national interest, but profoundly affect the people that are on the ground in the countries affected and the global community, right? You're seeing broad services and government shutdowns in Southeast Asia because of their vulnerability to oil. But it appears clear to me that the current administration in the White House is not moved by those sorts of concerns. The fact that they're willing to even threaten obliterating the power grid for a country like Iran, or watch as the power grid fails in Cuba through pressure for what end? We can only speculate. And in some, depending on the facts, those could be considered war crimes, right? Because you're shutting down power to NICUs, right? So when you do something that broad, you're guaranteed to have scores, hundreds of infants die, people in surgery, that are not getting services, right?
Think